Welcome to our continuing series of Virtual Voices, focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and hosted by World Information Transfer. Our speaker today is Paul Ellis, who is an internationally recognized authority on sustainable investing and is the host of Sustainable Finance Podcast. With listeners in over 58 countries, he brings you the conversations with trailblazers in low carbon economy, climate technology, nature-based solutions, impact investing, AI integration, and environmental, social, and governance structures. Paul's extensive experience includes contributions to Financial Advisor magazine, Equities News, and co-authoring articles on impact investing. With 23 years of experience as a certified financial planner and franchise advisor with Ameriprise, he consulted on marketing and advisor education for all. A frequent conference speaker and moderator for the Wall Street Green Summit, Paul brings unparalleled expertise to every discussion. Over to you, Mr. Ellis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Durbeck, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. You've had so many distinguished speakers over the years and over time. I'm very glad to be counted in this group of people who have the messages that all of our I think our younger people especially want to hear today related to sustainable finance and development at the global scale. I'd like to give a little background on how I got the podcast platform started back in 2018 to give everyone an idea of how serendipity can often play a role in career development if you allow it to fill you with energy and enthusiasm on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can do in sustainable development is go to work every day with a lot of enthusiasm, because there's a lot of things that we need to change and do differently on the planet today related to business opportunities and particularly the energy transition. So in 2018, I had a 23-year career as a financial advisor at that point in time, and I sold my practice and decided to start consulting with other financial advisory practices. In that process, as Dr. Durbeck said, I started writing articles for Financial Advisor magazine and other publications in the industry. And through that process of writing the articles, I met my good friend Jeffrey Gitterman, who has his own asset management firm, Gitterman Wealth Management, and we started working on projects together because we were at that point, both of us, very committed already to sustainable investment strategies, looking at the environment, at social issues, at governance issues within the corporate infrastructure to focus on how we could bring peer pressure and development into business in a way that would be supportive of the UN SDGs. So we decided to talk to people in California and in places like Colorado who were already doing a lot of this kind of business and putting on very successful events to promote their work. And they said to us, oh, you can't do that kind of conference in New York City. Nobody will attend. There's nobody, none of the investors on Wall Street are interested in what you're doing, and et cetera, et cetera. Both of us had long career experience that was just not true. They just weren't taking the right approach to investors and asset management firms here on the East Coast. We partnered with the UN Partnership Office and scheduled our first event for one of the large UN meeting rooms. And we were able to put 750 financial advisors in the seats in that room and invited many companies that do business in the sustainable investment world to attend and present and speak with this large group of advisors. That's when I started the podcast platform, because we were 20 weeks away from the event date and we weren't exactly sure how we were going to advertise it. So I said to Jeff, well, there's 17 sustainable development goals, and I'm going to get a subject matter expert for each one of the sustainable development goals to make a presentation. I've wanted to launch a podcast platform for a couple of years, so let's use this to promote the event. We didn't have any trouble getting speakers for any of the SDGs. Many of them were already applying the SDG investment model across their entire practice, and they were eager to join us and speak about how the Sustainable Development Goals were really shifting the way that a lot of investors around the world and in the US were looking at their portfolio strategies and going to meetings with their financial advisors and saying, listen, I want to incorporate environmental impact. I want to incorporate social goods and social monitoring of companies into the way that I invest. So we were able to put together this very good event. Like I said, 750 financial advisors attended, and that was really the start of the podcast platform. It sort of got legs of its own after that, and I started doing a podcast a week. And that was over 6 years ago. We celebrated our 6th anniversary in May. And we've done 266 programs since then. And I'm proud to say that half of the speakers and guests for those programs, I think it's actually a little bit more than 50%, are women in our industry who are asset managers, investors, running platforms for venture capital and private equity, as well as managing large portfolios of assets for major investment firms throughout the industry. Gender equality is one of the things that I have felt most strongly about in our industry today. And I think it's with good reason, not just an emotional tie to equality, which I think is very important on a societal basis overall. But we are in the middle of a wealth transfer in the United States that over the next 10 years or so is going to involve the transition between generations of over $30 trillion of managed wealth. And over 50% of that money is going to go to women survivors of their partnership with a man in the baby boomer group, and also in the Gen X group over time. And more than 50% of the survivors of the men who are currently managing a lot of this money are women. So one of the things I want to impress upon all of the women in the audience today, and the men as well, is that we are very much going to be in a shared asset management role as investors and advisors across the board globally going forward, because the women who are going to inherit all of this money and control it going forward are very keen on making sure that environmental and social issues are part of the engagement that they participate in as asset managers. In fact, just a quick story about a former client of mine who I no longer work with because I'm not as a financial advisor anymore. I'm not licensed anymore, but she called me to just get some advice about the relationship she was in with a male advisor who wasn't really interested in supporting her focus on the SDGs and sustainable investment strategies for her capital. I said, find a new financial advisor. There's lots of women advisors out there today. There are lots of men who are happy to work with women who do want to focus on sustainability as one of the issues that's involved with their investment strategies. So I started the podcast platform. We've been running it for 6 years now. I work with entrepreneurs. I work with asset management firms. I work with NGOs that support the development of both public and private asset management use of environmental, social, and governance issues in their portfolio strategies. I don't care what anybody says about environmental, social, and government issues as part of the metrics process for analyzing portfolio investment strategies. They're very valuable. They're available across every industry and every sector of the economy if people are willing to do the work to dig in and find out why companies are doing the things that they're doing in both environmental, social, and governance context. And it's very important today that the message gets sent from investors of every generation up to the people who are board members and CEOs and senior executives and chief investment officers at every medium to large company in our financial system, that these issues are important to analyze. They're global issues. There are many places in the world where people don't have any opportunity to invest in the infrastructure of their economies because they're not educated about how to do it, or they simply don't have the investment dollars available through their banking systems. The wealth is very concentrated in small percentages of the overall population. So what I want to say to all of the interns that are working in this program this year is make sure that when you start vetting firms to work for in the industry, that the first thing, one of the first questions you ask is, how do you integrate the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into the investment process of your company? And if they say, we don't know, we don't do that, or we don't know how to do that, then cross that company off your list and go on, move on to the next opportunity to get into this part of the industry. There are many people with advanced degrees today who are taking the roles of chief sustainability officer, participating as analysts at the portfolio level in the investment industry, and actually being asset managers. You can check the credentials of all of my podcast guests. And for example, there are folks that are running portfolio strategies for a company named Schroders, which you may be familiar with. They're one of the largest public asset management firms in the world. They manage almost $1 trillion for pension plans and individuals and wealthy families all over the world. I have them as clients of mine, and we do programs several times a year to talk about how they are integrating the Sustainable Development Goals into every portfolio that they manage throughout the year. And then I work with companies like Novata, Novata. This is a company that acts as an on-ramp for both private equity and venture capital size portfolio companies who are looking to be affiliated with a platform that can help them grow their business aggressively over 5 to 10 years and get the kinds of advice and support and board members that they're looking for, so that they can make a decision at some point in the future about whether they want to become a public company and go through that process, or if they just want to stay private. But this company, Novata, is providing the opportunity for all of these smaller portfolio companies to start tracking environmental, social, and governance criteria related to how they are running their business, so that they make sure that when they are working with a supplier who's part of their supply chain for their company, that they know that that company is integrating the same sustainable development goal process into their business, and they're not going to get into trouble with the regulators, both in the US and all around the world, as these very significant regulatory infrastructures start gradually coming into play. And that's going to impact companies regardless of where they are organized or incorporated. Once they get to a certain size, companies, wherever they originate from, are going to be required to do regulatory reporting akin to the Sustainable Development Goal process wherever they do business, as long as they manage so many dollars and they have so many employees in these different economies. That includes the EU, that will include Central and South America, and developing economies all over the world within the next decade or so. This process has actually been underway, and the Sustainable Development Goals have been in place for a couple of decades now. This is not something that is brand new. It's not something that politicians should get engaged with and outside of their real job, which is focusing on how to create a regulatory system that allows businesses to function in a sustainable way, and to take care of the environment, and to make sure that the communities that they work in have clean air, clean water, access to good, healthy food, and all of the things that they need to live a good life wherever they live, whether it's in the US or South America or in Northern Africa. And that's what these regulatory infrastructures and the governments that run them are supposed to be doing. It's not always done. They're not always true to their either promises or to the ability to organize and run these types of infrastructures. And that's where programs like the one that you are participating in through the UN come into play. And that's why the Sustainable Development Goals exist. They are there to create an environment that companies and governments can share together and work on this kind of a process, so that we can have a livable planetary temperature on a day-to-day basis in all around the world, and we can grow sustainable agricultural crops that we can feed our growing human population in every country, and that we have the ability to run successful businesses locally, regionally, and nationally for the health and well-being of our human populations. This is something that a lot of people who get involved in politics are not really focusing on in terms of the needs of their constituency. And we need to make sure that as voters and participants in the democratic processes of the countries that we live in, we vet candidates. We ask them what they are engaged in around their government, not only government, but their business processes for regulation that they will be working on when they take office. That's the best way for us to work both the political and the cultural and the economic process for managing our societies. I think I'll stop there for a moment, Dr. Durbach, and I'll take any questions that people have. Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely. I was really listening intently to what you were saying. It is absolutely fantastic that you started focusing on 2018
Mhm.
about what can be done because, the Sustainable Development Goals were developed right after the Millennium Goals expired.
That's
So
right.
it has been just excellent that you are bringing companies and teaching them about their responsibility, not only to make money and become multimillionaires, but to the fact that they're living on a planet that needs their input to create a sustainable environment for everybody. So
Yes.
I was just listening and intently what you were saying and jotted down a couple of notes about what your work has, what you have been doing and how you got into it. Now,
Mhm.
can you tell us a little bit more about the type of the companies that their main objective is not just to be rich, but and take care of the stockholders, but
Mhm.
basically have other, how should I put it, other attention, that their attention span is not taken away from their responsibility to the world, since the world is helping them make money.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. I have plenty of stories because I've worked with over 200 of these entrepreneurial types in the last 6 years. And I'll start out with a story about a young woman entrepreneur who lives in Morocco. And what she has been doing with her company, which, excuse me, is named Sand to Green.
Oh,
Now, she is an entrepreneur who has studied biology, who has studied agriculture, who has studied chemistry, and has developed a process for taking land that is no longer available to use for agriculture because literally the climate is drying it out and turning it into desert. And what she does is she applies this overall process where she studies and finds out what the local crops were when they were growing or while they're still growing in these communities and in these areas that are now becoming desertified. And she and her team uh, recreate oases. One of the things that I didn't know when I first met her was that every oasis in every desert all around the world is man or woman made. Um, there's no desert that exists that was naturally there in the middle of the desert when people found it. It was created by people tapping the water systems in the ground in the desert, and if the water is too salty, finding ways to filter it, and that's what this company does, Sand to Green. They use solar powered electrolysis to convert the brackish water under the sands into water that they can use for drinking, for cooking, and to water crops. So in these communities where they're working, they know what the natural plant life and agricultural products are from the past. They plant those, they work in 5-acre plots of land, and they are regenerating the agricultural community in a lot of these um, communities in Morocco initially. They have big plans to take this on a global scale to lots of other countries and lots of other opportunities around the world. But that's just the kind of thinking that someone like Wissal Ben Musa, and that's this young woman's name, has developed into a business model that, of course, they're looking for money to expand their operations. And that's the kind of company that I like to have as a guest on the podcast, because I get to promote their business opportunities as well. I get to promote the possibility for them to raise capital from venture capital and private equity firms and even public investors who would be interested in what they're doing. So that's one example that comes to mind right away. And perhaps another example would be appropriate of a company that is already well established in their industry and is a well-run corporation that is incorporating a lot of sustainable ideas into what they're doing. Would that be of interest, do you think?
This fascinating. Actually, I was just going to mention that many years ago, I took my mother with me on one of my trips to Israel.
Okay.
And as I was traveling through the entire area, the Gaza, et cetera, with my car, I noticed the drip irrigation that was really restoring the sands. And,
Yes.
it was helping the entire area to start doing farming and feeding the people. So as you were talking, it reminded me of my own trip and understanding of how effective that was. And that was let me see, that was in the beginning of the 2000, after the we turned over the century. I think it was 2001.
Yeah.
They were doing it at that time.
Yes, the Israelis have become experts at this type of farming, of course, because that's the land, the kind of land that they've had to deal with, right? So
that is correct.
And they've been able to convert it to very productive agricultural opportunities where they are now many of the experts that consult with other smaller ventures or other countries around the world today come from places like Israel, where they've perfected these types of models now. And that's the other thing that I wanted to mention with this initial example, is that we're very uneducated about the number of people, in my experience, who are doing these kinds of entrepreneurial and business building and work through the Sustainable Development Goals around the world. There are literally millions of people doing this kind of work all over the planet. Most of them are in communities where they don't ever even seek recognitions for it, other than running a successful business within their community that might be about solar energy, it might be about clean water, it might be about agriculture, it may be about waste treatment. There are so many different opportunities for young people today to get engaged across the spectrum of our business communities and focus on sustainability as one of the key issues and following the path to supporting the SDGs and insisting that the companies that they work for do the same. That's one of I think the things that I'm seeing happening a lot now as students go through graduate level programs in universities all over the world, and they study these types of technologies, whether they're here on the ground as part of the Earth's forestry or water systems, or whether they're in the stars where they're out, creating communication links and creating opportunities for successful communication systems around the world. That's where the future is, in my opinion. I'm very interested in working with young entrepreneurs who have a vision for something that may be just beyond the horizon, where a lot of people can't envision it, but they want to work on it and they want to make that happen. And they're doing great things in a lot of industries, especially in my case, of course, because it's my career experience in financial services. They're creating many different kinds of new technologies for use in financial services, artificial intelligence being the one that we hear about in the news every day. But they're creating lots of different ways to share information much more effectively than it has ever been shared before. And of course, what that creates is the opportunity for collaboration of people being able to work together wherever they are on the planet and bringing the resources of their local communities to the knowledge and development of technologies around the world.
Well, thank you. Now that you're focusing on students, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Susie.
Okay.
She's going to ask all you from all the questions that have come in so far.
Okay.
Over to you, Susie.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach, and thank you, Paul, for a very relevant webinar. The first question from the audience is, what topics or issues, in your opinion, are most relevant for conferences and moderating sessions that you participate in? Like, what are the topics that audiences are really interested in these days?
Well, of course, Susie, to a certain extent, that's a very good and important question. The topics of relevance are the ones that you read about and hear about most often through media and news outlets around the world. The ones that I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago where I was doing some short video recordings with business leaders who were there. And the topics that I remember people talking about the most are, how do we sequester carbon most effectively? What are the ways that we can capture carbon, whether it's putting it into the soil, whether it's capturing it from the air or the water or wherever it is being exuded to. And I heard a very fascinating story about carbon capture, which involves a company named Grain Ecosystem. Now, this is a company that participates actively in the voluntary carbon markets, where carbon contracts can be bought and sold to be used to reduce the amount of carbon that is being produced by a company's business, or that is being captured from the air, and people can contract to develop both agricultural and other types of business opportunities through valuation of carbon pollution as we remove it from the atmosphere. There are lots of complexities in this kind of process, but that's one of the things that I think is really attracting a lot of attention from entrepreneurs today, to the point where the insurance industry, which is the second largest asset management group on the planet after the banking system, is starting to issue insurance contracts to protect the carbon markets as they develop, so that if a particular project manager goes out of business, or there's a hurricane. Here's a good story about this. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. My friend, who's one of the co-founders of Grain Ecosystem, was down in Louisiana a couple of weeks ago to meet with sugarcane farmers. So you might ask, well, why would somebody who's working in the carbon markets want to meet with sugarcane farmers? There's a consortium of sugarcane farmers in a part of Louisiana that have byproducts of their sugar refinery process that they need to get rid of. For the last 20 years, one of these consortiums has been piling up the refuse that's left over from the sugarcane stalks And they literally have created a mountain that covers 40 acres of prime agricultural real estate in southern Louisiana. And they've been desperate to try and remove all of this carbon-filled soil out of their farming land so that they can plant those 40 acres. Well, this company that I know and do business with was down there looking to see how they could incorporate the residue from the sugarcane growing process into contracts that can be used on the voluntary carbon markets, so that that refuse can be sold to farmers elsewhere in the world. And they're solving a huge problem for these sugarcane growers, because they're actually going to restore 40 acres of prime agricultural real estate over time. That's the kind of thing that's happening sort of off the radar screen of a lot of big companies, because it's a fairly new technology, but that's really exciting. The thing that everyone is most focused on right now in terms of its potential for accelerating business and learning processes, of course, is artificial intelligence. And part of the process of creating the opportunity for artificial intelligence to work is that you have to dedicate a lot of energy to it. And that means that you have to build big energy centers that are consuming a lot of energy. Right at the moment, it's a combination of renewable energy and the typical energy infrastructure from the oil and gas industry. And so AI is not only one of the ways forward, and there are tremendous investment and career opportunities in the world of AI these days. And at the same time, one of the things we have to figure out is a way to use regenerative AI without it consuming so much energy and creating so much carbon pollution. So that's just a couple of examples of the types of companies that are out there really looking to be funded with a lot of creative ideas about the technologies that they're developing, and integrating those processes, those business processes, with the investment community, so that not only stock markets, but fixed income markets that are responsible for issuing all of the bond instruments and fixed income instruments for governments and corporations around the world can participate in this kind of process. So anybody who's interested in finance, there's plenty of opportunity going forward to plug into these technologies.
Thank you. And you raised some topics related to the next question, which is, what ethical issues, in your opinion, arise in connection with the use of AI in the field of investing, and how can they be mitigated or even resolved?
Yeah, I'll just continue where I stopped, because really this is, it's not only probably the most significant opportunity for advancing our ability to analyze huge amounts of information much more quickly than any person who actually has to get some sleep and take time to eat every day can do, versus the AI, artificial intelligence process that we can do through advanced computer technology. And as the person who asked the question referenced, we have a terrific problem at the moment with the amount of energy that AI consumes, and there's no way we can supply all that energy without burning more fossil fuels at the moment. That's the dilemma, a big dilemma that we face. And one of the types of companies that I'm working with and focusing on investment in for people that I consult with is a company that is finding ways to develop the AI process with less energy consumption over time and deliver better coordinated systems of the use of what artificial intelligence produces. One of the things that we all know is that artificial intelligence has limitations versus the human mind. Artificial intelligence can't do anything that it's designed to do without first being programmed by human beings. So as long as that's the process that we're working with, it's really like producing any other type of product that we've been doing since the dawn of human beings, and we'll find an answer to it. There's a lot of people working on it, and there's a lot of money being invested in it today by major corporations in technology all over the world. We don't quite have the answer to the energy consumption issue yet, but it's something that we will find an answer to, just like we find an answer to everything else through the developments of appropriate technologies. So,
thank you. And as companies are rolling out their ESG agendas and strategies, what do you think are key factors for the successful implementation of a sustainability framework in a private company?
That's a very good question. And in private companies, it may even be a more important question than public companies, because public companies already undergo a significant level of scrutiny from regulatory agencies. Private companies, on the other hand, are often not nearly as regulated, and have to develop this type of process early on in their growth, in my opinion, if they want to become the kind of companies that we want in the use of sustainability models every single day. There's a number of platforms in the technology industry today that are essentially structured to provide the kinds of data tracking that private companies do, so that they can be ready if they do decide to become public, or even if they stay private over time as they continue to grow their business. They can have delivery systems for the metrics that they have to track that are essentially their primary objectives. There's a wonderful book out right now by Allison Taylor, who is a recent guest of mine on the Sustainable Finance podcast. She's a professor at the NYU Stern School of Business. And the title of her book is, let's see, I'll come back to the title, but what the book is about is that it's designed to help businesses, big companies, small companies, and everybody in between, build the infrastructure for tracking their KPIs. And she suggests that a big company even starts with just 2 or 3 of the most important things that they are finding they are generating value from in their business model, and start there. One of the things that she promotes is the use by corporations of every size of a system that does not ask your employees, your vendors, the people that you source your materials, etc., from, to track every single thing that they are doing all at the same time. This kind of process of integration of metrics and data is a gradual process, and companies that try and do too much too fast often end up failing in their efforts to incorporate ESG metrics into their business models. So if they focus on the key issues, and this is something that has to start in the C-suite, regardless of the size of the company, because if it's not being promoted throughout the entire length and depth of a business model, it's not going to take hold. It's not going to be used by everybody that's working for the company. So senior executives in even large or small corporations really have the obligation today, in my opinion, to start with a few key issues and work on those with every team that's in the company and every process that they're developing business through, and integrate that gradually. We're not going to figure all of these problems out and all of these issues out in the next decade. It's going to take multiple decades, and our governments are going to have to be flexible enough to promote that kind of integration process. That's what the SDGs were all about when they were initially proposed and issued, that this was going to be a process that was going to take time, and that we all have to be not only patient, but very careful about how we integrate these kinds of guidelines into our business models. I didn't mean to go rambling on, but if that hopefully that helped the person who asked that question to understand a little bit better about how you might pursue the integration of ESG metrics.
I'm sure it was very helpful, and it's a very complex topic, so warranted a long-winded answer.
Okay.
So the next question, do you see an important role of podcasts and the use of other media platforms in sort of popularizing the ideas of sustainable development among audiences? I think of like circular economy type of trends and businesses where we're trying, we have enough clothing to address the population many times over. So how can we make it trendy to buy already used clothing? So things like that. Do you see podcasts and media platforms playing a role in this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm happy to answer it as a podcast host and a person who's also been a guest on multiple other podcasts. I think, and that's one of the reasons my podcast has grown to be 6 years old, is that this is one of the most effective and impactful types of communication that we have available to us today. We're overwhelmed with information on a daily, weekly, monthly, and annual basis, and we've created the process and the media that generate all of that information. But I think it's very important for all of us today, whatever it might be applicable to in our lives, whether it's where to get the best type of Indian food, or where to go take the bus to get to see the movie you want to see, or where to tune in to how businesses and business people are incorporating many new technologies into the world today that most of us probably haven't even heard of. My platform doesn't have a gigantic audience. We have a significant global audience, but we're not trying to be the podcast to suit everybody's tastes. We want to hear the stories of people who are doing sustainable business development throughout the entire global economy. We started in our distant past a form of communication through language that focuses on storytelling. In its most effective processes and forms, it has always been about people telling stories about what they do, about how they live, about their work, about their families, about their communities. This is how we have learned as human beings to get to the point where we are today, where we use technology for so many different things to support our business and our personal stories. That is never going to change, in my opinion. And I certainly don't see it changing anytime in the next few decades. So I ask all of my followers and all of the people who listen into a program like this to really remember that storytelling is how we got here in all of the good ways and all of the ways that we are still working on to communicate more effectively and figure out how to solve the problems that we have. And I think storytelling will always be the way that we are most effective in what we do. So tell stories, listen to podcasts. And if you're a commuter and you're on the subway or you're driving or whatever, and you only have 10 minutes between stops or on the way to work or on the way home or going to the store, great, take advantage of those time frames. And the great thing about podcasts is you can always push the button to turn them off and push the button to turn them back on. And some of the most effective podcasters that I know are people who calibrate their presentation style into short segments that are, let's say 5 to 7 minutes long, so that their listeners, and that's what we try and do on the Sustainable Finance Podcast, so that their listeners have time to listen to the explanation of one idea or the telling of one story by the podcast guest, and then they can click it off and come back to it, and they don't feel like they're leaving in the middle of the conversation. So that's what I suggest people use podcasts for, are educational, entertainment, and training tools for themselves and their families. And if you can get your kids, if you have children, and you can get your young children away from the big computer or television screen, the more time they spend doing other things rather than staring at that screen, the better, in my opinion. So.
Thank you. We have some questions that came in from the audience around how you make investment decisions. Are there principles or criteria you adhere to? Maybe some skills that you think are important to have success in finance. Could you speak to those?
Sure. One of the things that I found when I reprogrammed my model for doing financial services to individuals and small institutions as a financial advisor, one of the things that I discovered is that some of the people that I didn't anticipate would be receptive to the idea of sustainable investing were some of my best clients when it came to sustainable investing. I'll give you an example. I knew that the school teachers and administrators that I worked with in the Hudson Valley would be at least willing to hear my message about sustainable investing. But I was very surprised to find that the IBM engineers that I was working with in my practice were just as receptive when they understood the way the technologies worked and how to incorporate those types of technologies as an investment opportunity in their own lives and with their retirement money or their opportunistic investment strategies. And of course, engineers have to be very specific about their work, and everything has to be measured very carefully. And when they started understanding how important that process is with environmental, social, and governance measurement of metrics in their industry, it really turned a lot of heads. And I doubled the size of my practice in just 5 years doing business that way. That was a big surprise, and one that I was very happy to be part of, because I thought those clients were going to be difficult to transition to a more sustainable point of view about investing. So remember that the key issues in any kind of investing are: what's the system that you're using? What kind of profitability can you measure over time? And do the investment strategies and opportunities meet your personal development goals as well? The last thing anybody that I worked with wanted to have to say to me was, I spent all of these years making all this money and not paying attention to how it was being invested, and it grew a lot, but I'm not so sure it was invested in the ways that I would have wanted it to be invested over time. So I think young generations today are much better educated about these issues, and you can take control of and maneuver your personal investment strategy in ways that are much more sustainable for the long term today.
Are there any myths about finance that you think are common but wrong, or maybe mistakes people make when planning their financial independence and how they can be avoided?
Yes, there are. There have always been. There will always be mythologies that are ultimately, in the long run, not very productive in terms of good investment strategies. A lot of investors feel that way about AI and cryptocurrency today. But actually, those are manageable processes of intelligence gathering and creation of wealth opportunities that over time will become fully integrated into our business processes, into our social infrastructure, and into our community lives. Remember, we've been through this kind of cycle over and over and over again in the course of human development. And all of the things that we think are way too new or nobody can understand in the early stages of development often become the things that support us in the best ways over time. And even so, my strong advice to young investors especially is, make sure that you make a study of how you are investing your money at a personal level very carefully before you start committing capital to investment strategies that you plan to be involved in for any longer than a year or so. There's lots of scams out there. There's lots of people operating on the fringe of the financial world who like to take advantage of folks that are maybe not as educated as they are about how to manipulate the financial system. And in that, I don't mean manipulating it in a negative way necessarily, but take advantage of other people in the process. So there'll always be those types of opportunities to speculate in our global economy. Just be careful, make sure that you're educated about anything that you're actually taking as a serious investment strategy.
And as you look to the future of sustainable finance, ESG, AI, what like closing thoughts or advice do you have for our audience members, a lot of them being students looking to work in similar fields? Any closing thoughts or advice for them?
Yes. Study the systems that you are attracted to. One of the things that I learned, I think, too late in my life, or kind of late in my life, was that I have a natural ability to build relationships no matter what business I'm actually pursuing from a technical point of view. And one of the things that has served me the best, as I learned that when I was probably in my late 20s or early 30s, is that I can always find people to support what I want to do, who have the skills and the knowledge and the intelligence to do the more technical parts of business development. Not everybody has to go to business school. Not everybody has to have a PhD. There's lots of opportunity for people who are relationship managers, which I've always felt I was more of than any kind of technical person, who can team with people who have all the technical skills and they love applying it on a day-to-day basis to support their professional development. So, cater to your strengths is the best advice I can give. That's the way that anybody excels in the long term and into the future of their career development.
Thank you so much for the interesting conversation. I'll turn back to Dr. Durbach to close out.
Thank you very much, Susie, for moderating. And actually, I was listening intently to your presentation, and it reminded me that basically you're taking the process that the Grimm brothers took when they were talking about the fairy tales for children.
Right.
I remember that I always taught my patients who were children by the Grimm's fairy tale, and there teach them all sorts of things, because then you're asking them to incorporate thinking with feelings and with practice in one sequence session. So I really enjoyed your analogy with what you're doing. We also have a couple more questions from the students, and one of them is, given your extensive background in sustainable finance and your work with the Sustainable Finance podcast, what trends do you see emerging in the integration of AI with ESG investing?
Yes, we were talking about this a little while ago. The ability to accelerate the pace of development of sustainable investment is just one of the areas that AI really is very supportive of. I was reviewing a podcast program earlier today because I was reposting it for one of my podcast guests to a story that she had posted online. And if you think about that process that I used to add information to what her message already was online, that in a very basic sense is a form of AI. The story had already been told by my former guest. I was able to add value to that story in a small way by letting people know that she had been a guest on the podcast platform, and that they could not only reference the post that she put on LinkedIn, but they could also go and open the podcast program that I recorded with that guest and hear her story, parts of her story, maybe different parts of her story, but also from a different point of view. And the way of storytelling that involves the human voice and the human face and all of our intelligence processes in a way that we use our imagination for when we're reading things, but there's nothing like the human face to tell you the real story that you're looking to hear from any individual. So I love doing that with the podcast, and I think that's one of the most effective, that's one of the things that people like most about our programs, is that we're people talking to other people. So.
Thank you. There's another question from student. How do you assess the impact of artificial intelligence on your field of activity?
I'm really still in the early stages of exploring this question. So thank you for asking. I think it's going to be a period of time, maybe a few years yet, before we fully understand how AI is supportive of the kind of work that I'm doing in storytelling and in producing podcasts. I already know ways that I use it to accelerate the distribution of the stories that we tell. And I think that that's going to continue, and that's probably going to be one of the most effective uses of AI over time. I mean, my gosh, I've got 266 episodes to get out there on a day-to-day basis already, and hopefully there's going to be many more in the future. So one way that we're using it on our YouTube platform is that we've created playlists, and we've also created essentially a way of tracking where the particular parts of a conversation are happening in a transcript that's available on our YouTube channel, as well as the playlists that are groups of podcasts that people can go to hear about different strategies, different technologies, different approaches to ESG metrics use. And so those are already very rudimentary forms of AI. There's going to be many more in the future. Hopefully we'll be able to keep pace with the development of them and the use of them. But I think those are ways that you can use our type of platform today. So go to the YouTube program platform, and you can get playlists and the individual programs, and you can get a transcript description of what we're talking about during each couple of minutes of each program.
Well, thank you very, very much. That the last question that you answered was exactly what there were a couple of students that were interested in. So thank you for the information. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us.
Yes.
And wish you a continued success in all of your work, and have a very good week, and goodbye.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Durbach, for the opportunity, and thank you, Mariam, for setting this up. You didn't give me much time to think about it, and that turned out to be very good. So
yes, sometimes impulsivity adds to creativity.
That's right. Okay. Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.